Before we watched TV shows and movies on Narcos, and even before Pablo Escobar's rise to fame, there was one man who was the ultimate narco. He lived the narco life of greed, money, and power, but found a way to reclaim his life and use his astonishing experiences to empower others to live a life of hope, meaning, and redemption. Welcome to the Narco Mindset Podcast, where Dr. Jorge Valdes shares his journey through life before and after the Medellin Drug Cartel, from torture and multiple prison sentences to how he refocused his life onto a path of principles learned as a narco. It's time to share that raw truth with you, right here on the Narco Mindset Podcast, with your host, Dr. Jorge Valdes.
Welcome to the Narco Mindset Podcast. My name is Dr. Jorge Valdes. Today I will share with you two-part interview that I did on the Talk of Shame podcast. It was quite fascinating with my buddy in Ireland. I was very excited to do this episode. Two reasons. Number one, because I love Irish whiskey. Number two, because it's a pretty fascinating podcast. He asked some really hard questions about my old days in the cartel. He asked some questions about whether Griselda Blanco was more powerful than Pablo Escobar or whether they worked together. What was my opinion? Stay tuned. You will find all the answers on the Narco Mindset Podcast.
Welcome to episode number 29 of Talk of Shame podcast. On this week's episode, I am speaking to one of the founding members of the Medellin Drug Cartel, a guy called Jorge Valdes, who has worked very closely and done business with the likes of Pablo Escobar. This is an incredible episode, and somebody, as I said, you don't get to speak to him every day. You don't get to speak to somebody like this and get an insight into the world and times of... This guy was one of the biggest drug dealers in the world at one stage. So this is just incredible. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe wherever it is you're listening to the podcast. Subscribe on Instagram at Talk of Shame Pod, and just be aware that this is split into two different episodes. So look out for the second episode, which will be released later on this week. George, how are you?
I'm doing well, my friend.
Very good. Listen, and it's an absolute pleasure to speak to you. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I've been really looking forward to speaking to you. So it's genuinely an honor to have you on. For those of you who don't know who George is a Cuban member who was one of the founding members of the Medellin Cartel. And at one point, you were one of the biggest drug traffickers in the United States. That was in the 70s and 80s. And you've had dealings with some pretty big drug dealers in the history of the narcotics business, including, I suppose, Pablo Escobar, which many consider as the biggest, right?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So I'll tell you this. Well, two things. It's great to be on your show.
Thank you.
I only decided to do your show. I'm not doing any more podcasts. I had decided not to do anymore. But I love Ireland and I love Irish whiskey, so I just couldn't help myself.
Thank you so much.
And actually, we were headed to Ireland this year. We went to Scotland 2 years ago because my son was a golfer. And my daughter was going to get married in an Irish castle. Thank God she broke a boyfriend, so I didn't have that bill. but and Rory McIlroy is one of my favorite golfers in the world. So
there you go.
I couldn't help myself. I could not help myself.
Good.
But yeah, it's an honor to be with you. You know, I'm just giving you highlights of my life. There's more detail in two books I wrote. The first one, Coming Clean, which now I just released on Amazon, the 20th anniversary edition. It was a bestseller in 98. And I did tell, my message, I came from a very, very poor family. I mean, very wealthy family in Cuba, but we lost everything coming to the U.S.
Yeah.
And I had to go to work at the age of 10. And, my mother was very religious and my father was not. My father was not that he was anti-religion. He just, typical man, Catholic of the 50s, 40s.
Yeah.
Very private about his religion.
Yeah.
And not her. God was everything. So we come to the United States to be with God. she gets left behind. My dad begins to have to clean. He was one of the wealthiest men in Cuba.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, he's cleaning toilets at a department store for barely enough to eat. And
Wow.
I mean, all I had for lunch, for breakfast was 2 raw eggs and this pot of milk that would not mix.
Sure.
But, we grew up with tremendous principle.
Sorry, George, just one question. One question I was going to ask you there. Like, obviously, as you said there, that you were like very wealthy in Cuba. Why did you end up deciding, or why did your family end up deciding to move to Miami then?
Because my mother refused for her children to grow up in a communist regime.
Okay,
and especially one that said that, like I said, she's very religious. So one that said there's no God, and for her, God was everything.
Sure.
So she's like, to the point that she was willing to give it all up.
Yeah.
To come to the United States. A woman that her father was one of the biggest figures in Cuba. And, my mother, I tell people, my mother was born with a silver spoon. I mean, my mother had an apartment in New York City when she was 20 years old.
Wow.
So very wealthy, came and to pick tomatoes in the tomato fields.
Yeah.
That's what she was willing to do. So her children will be able to come to a country to worship God freely and not be under communist regime.
Yeah, it's funny because I've spent a lot of time over in Miami, and pretty much every person from Cuba that I've met all kind of speaks the same thing about kind of, I suppose, the Castro regime, and everyone who's there were people who got out during that. And I mean, like, there seems to be a lot of dislike for, I suppose, the Cuban regime from Cubans that are living in the US.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, I didn't go back to Cuba till my mother died.
Wow.
I mean, I couldn't even go to Cuba and visit. I wanted to go back to Cuba because I wanted to see where I was born.
Yeah.
When you look at it, we're the only race in history to be in exile 60 years.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
But because Castro turned it into a total communist dictatorship, and everybody lost everything. And, the people were hurt a lot. And so my mother, like every typical Cuban in Miami, would have nothing to do. I mean, they looked at Castro like the devil.
Yeah.
So I was too young. So I did not feel that. All I could tell about that was from my parents.
Yeah.
But seeing their suffering and seeing how they came to the United States and willing to leave everything, live a life of luxury to come to the United States and literally go hungry. It had to be a very, very compelling reason for them.
Yeah.
But the good thing about the people in Miami, as you live there, is, and you see what's going on in the world with this Black Lives Matters movement and police and all of that stuff. Hey, I'm considered a person of color in the U.S., right? Because I'm a Hispanic.
Sure.
But so not to say that we ever went through or suffer the racism that the African Americans did,
sure,
and all that they went through. I mean, we went through our own kind. I mean, when you're 10 years old, you get off the airport and you see this lady looking at you and say, "Go back to Cuba," spit, calling us old names, and Miami's not. And we literally in school we would be punished if we spoke Spanish.
Sure, I know.
You wonder, like, what is this all about? But the thing with the Cuban people is we never saw ourselves as a victim.
Yeah.
And we just united, strong.
Yeah.
We worked very hard, and we took over Miami.
Yeah. What year did you actually move to Miami, George?
1966.
66.
October 11, 1966.
Okay. So you would have been there during you would have been there for all of the growth of Miami and all of the craziness that went on, I suppose, in the 70s and 80s then. Well,
Miami, literally, it was us that built Miami. Miami was a city built upon drugs. If anybody says anything different, they're lying to you. I mean, Miami was just an old city for all Jewish people used to go die. Miami people was dead. And Miami was built with drug money. I mean, they said that during my period of time, which was my 77, 78, there was more money in the Federal Reserve Bank of Miami than there was in any Federal Reserve Bank in the United States.
I saw that. That's crazy.
It's unbelievable.
Like suddenly turns into this economic powerhouse, and it's all built from.
When you think about it, that we were generating in 1976, $100 million a month.
That's
I
crazy.
mean, we were producing more than the number one Fortune 500 company.
Yeah, that's incredible.
It was unbelievable.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one thing that I remember reading about you, George, was that, I mean, you grew up and you were quite anti-alcohol and you were anti-drugs and that. How did you actually get into the narcotics trade?
Well, I was and I am.
Yeah.
So my father had tremendous principle, right?
Yeah.
So he was like, hey, work hard, sacrifice, and get an education, or you will become somebody.
Yeah.
So I've been getting up at 4:30 since I was 10 years old.
Yeah.
Because I had to help my family eat.
Yeah.
So at 17, I never broken the law, never had a traffic ticket because I had a vision for my life.
Sure.
My life was I would graduate from University of Miami at 20. I would graduate from law school by 24, and I'd be a millionaire by 30.
Yeah.
Because my game plan was until I become a millionaire, I'm a nobody, and I don't want to be a nobody. So I went to school full time at University of Miami while working full time for the Federal Reserve Bank.
Yeah.
At the age of 17, I was the youngest employee in the federal government.
Yeah.
And I was an honor student, and I would not. By the age of 20, all the alcohol I drank in my life did not fit into a little teacup.
No way.
I never smoked in my life, never did drugs. And it's interesting that the original group, because I'll reveal this, and I did it in another podcast, there was no Medellin Drug Cartel.
Yeah.
That was a fabrication by the U.S. government, right?
Okay.
The original group, from where you would say the Medellin Cartel surfaced, was this group that I was part of. So I was a founding member of a group that became known as the Medellin Drug Cartel, because what happened from this original 4 people and me that control all the drug trade in America in the 70s, came, then surfaced the Pablo Escobar, the Ochoas. And I said that, and people thought I was crazy when I said it, until recently, one of the Ochoa brothers said the same identical thing. I don't know if he copied it from me in a podcast, but he said, hey, there was no Medellin Cartel. Why? Because as opposed to now, where you had the Sinaloa cartel with El Chapo, and where there was one boss, back then in Medellin, there was 5 groups.
Sure.
6 groups. 5 major groups, and each worked individually. Now, we worked together in something, but everybody had their own infrastructure.
Sure.
Here's another revelation. Pablo Escobar was by no means the biggest or the wealthiest.
Yeah.
By no means. Maybe half as wealthy and half. Now, what he was the most murderer.
Yeah.
He was the deadliest.
He was ruthless.
Yeah, very ruthless. If Pablo killed you, he would kill every male in your family. The big guys, no one ever knew.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was good for them, because when Pablo started to take all the fame because of the extradition, they were like, hey, good, let him.
Yeah.
But, there was the gotcha that people know of, probably was twice as wealthy as Pablo.
Sure.
And but Pablo got all the publicity.
Sure.
And it was good for the Americans to find one person.
Sure. Yeah. How does a Cuban end up getting mixed up with the Colombian drug cartels? How did that come about, George?
Because that's the other thing. Without the Cubans in the 70s, first with marijuana and then with the cocaine, there would have been no distribution. We control all the distribution. I started because when I graduated, my accounting professor asked me if I would go work for him. He'd give me a secretary office if I did the Spanish clients. He did not speak English in Miami. I live in Miami, if you don't speak English, you're in trouble. Spanish, you're in trouble. So he asked me, and I went to work for him. And the first client I went to do was a little grocery store.
Yeah.
And I would go in there on Monday, and think about it. This time I'm making $4 an hour working for the government, which was a huge salary when minimum wage was like $1.50.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I go in there and I see $125,000 the first time. Yeah. But I was so naive that I didn't think nothing about it at that time.
Yeah.
We need to go back also to the 70s, where cocaine was not even in the drug enforcement radar.
Sure.
Because it was something for the rich and famous, for the Hollywood celebrities. You can buy a gorgeous 4-bedroom home in Miami for $20,000 when a kilo of cocaine was $70,000. So who could afford that, right?
Wow.
So these people went like that. And I didn't think about it. Next week I come and there's 85,000. Now I start getting a little suspicious.
Yeah.
When I came the third week and there was another 100 grand, I'm like, I called the owner. I'm like, hey, let me give you a basic formula here.
Yeah.
Here's how it works. If you buy $100 and you sell it for 3 times the price, you sell it for $300. So $200 is your profit. I've deposited over $300,000 this month. That means you should have at least $100,000 in purchased goods.
Yeah.
But all you got is like $700. I mean, like, what gives? And they looked at me and they laughed and they're like, hey, listen, we're not drug dealers. I mean, we're not in the grocery business. We're drug dealers. I'm like,
and they were that upfront about it.
I mean, straight out like that. So I tell people, wow, I mean, I went into shock for about 10 seconds, really, because I was able to justify how we justify everything in life, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So for me, it was, hey, I'm an accountant. There's no money laundering laws. As long as I don't break the law, I'm okay.
Yeah.
And they asked me to open foreign bank accounts. And I began to open foreign bank accounts for them because I knew how to do that in the government. I started making a lot of money.
Yeah.
And then one thing led to the other. And then they approached me and they're like, listen, we want you to handle all our operations in the U.S. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I mean, I hadn't even seen what cocaine looked like. I'm like,
yeah.
And then
suddenly you're working with the big boys.
Who am I going to sell this? What the hell do I do with the money? How do I get it to the customer?
Yeah.
I didn't know any of that.
Yeah.
But, it's all about mindset. It's a recent book I wrote called Narco Mindset Journal. Everybody asks me, why don't you have any fear during this virus? How did you overcome prison, tortures, build multi-million-dollar company, get a Ph.D.? And I said, it's all about the mindset. It's about how I look at the world. I don't know what the word I can't means.
Yeah.
In my dictionary is how can I?
Yeah.
What is there to fear? I can't live a life with fear,
Yeah.
And if someone's done it, I can do it also.
Sure.
I might have to work 4 times as hard, but I can do it.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And so things like that. So, as I detailed in the book, then one thing led to the other. Before in 6 months, I was U.S. head of all operations. And in 1976, when I took over, they were bringing about 100 kilos a month, which was a lot back then. You talk about $7 million in retail. And the following year, we're bringing 600 to 1,000.
Yeah.
And there were times when we're bringing 800 3 times in 1 week.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was 21 years old. I was making $1 million, $2 million a month. And I was dating the most beautiful women in the world. I lived in mansions. I had a fleet of air jets.
Yeah.
I had yachts, $1 million worth of cars. Dated the prettiest supermodels, but I was miserable.
Yeah.
I couldn't understand. I reached my dream.
Yeah.
I finally got to the summit, and there's nothing here in the summit.
Yeah.
I'm still the same empty human being.
Why was that, George?
Huh?
Why was that you felt so empty?
Because, society tells us today the American dream.
Yeah.
The American dream doesn't exist in how society portrays it, right?
Yeah.
We're constantly inundated with commercials. If you have this, you will be happy. If you have this, if it's a car, if it's this women, if this gorgeous supermodel, if you have this beautiful home, and people end up getting into debt or people sacrifice everything to get that, and it's just not there. I believe for me, and it's important for your listener, I believe we're all born with a hole inside of our body, our soul. And I believe that hole can only be filled for Jorge Valdes. I'm not saying this for anybody else.
Sure.
Is by a relationship with my creator.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I was arrested in Panama. I crashed over the jungles of Panama, and I was tortured for 28 days, day and night.
Yeah.
When I was, for 5 years, I ended up going to a bathroom and passing blood.
Yeah.
I was brought to the United States and charged with heading the largest drug conspiracy in the world in 1979. And I was given the highest when a bond was $100 to $1,000. I was given a $7 million bond, and I was just 23 years old. I didn't even have a traffic ticket, and I didn't know that one of my attorneys had betrayed me, and he was telling everything to the government about me because I've been to prison twice.
Yeah,
never has there been a gram of drugs. Never has there been a picture with somebody compromising. Never has been a wiretap. Nothing. Always on a conspiracy charge.
So it's all been done by people going behind your back who had inside knowledge on you and feeding something. And some of these people could be compromised themselves in terms that they might need a deal.
Right. That's what happened with my attorney. He got arrested for bribing judges.
Yeah.
And he said, "Hey, I have a bigger fish than me."
Yeah.
And that was me. I didn't even find out for 5 years.
Yeah. I
got you. Crazy.
Yeah, one of the things that strikes me about you, George, is, I mean, I'm sure a lot of the listeners have seen the documentaries Cocaine Cowboys, and obviously you're seeing this extreme violence in there. It's obviously based on Griselda Blanco, and she strikes me as the direct opposite to you. She strikes me as completely, I mean, she seems vicious. You strike me as you're very well spoken, you're educated and that kind of thing. But you guys would have been in Miami and you would have been involved in the same business at the same time, I would have thought. No. Have you ever had any dealings with her or what was Miami like during the 70s and the 80s?
Okay. So not at all. When we started, the first group that started was business people. They were family people, very religious.
Okay.
The violence with Pablo and Griselda came in the 80s.
Okay.
Right? And she was very violent. Okay. She was very, very violent. And but I had no dealings with her at all. Because I went to prison in 79 to 84 when the violence really, really took over. But so two things about what you just mentioned. One, remember, every story that's out there is like Narcos, for example. People ask me, how real is Narcos, right?
Yeah.
I say, well, remember, if you're talking about the Medellin Drug Cartel, there's only probably 5 people alive that really, really know. Everybody in the world now works for the Medellin Cartel. Everybody, right? You see it in Narcos, you see it in Cocaine Cowboy and all that. Fine, it makes them feel good. The people that really did, there's very few alive that were in that inner circle, less than a handful, and they're not talking.
Yeah.
So what you see portrayed, a lot of it is entertainment, right?
Sure.
Now, sometime this year, follow that studio, Cocaine Cowboys, because they're coming out with their last Cocaine Cowboy episode, and I'm going to be in all the episodes.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because they asked me a question that goes a little bit hand in hand with what you just said. So they asked me, and it's never been asked before. So they said to me, why was it that it was so easy for you to walk away? So I come out of prison. I went back to the same thing. I was angry at the government. Yeah. I wanted to get even. I felt like, hey, I was arrested in Panama, brought to the United States, sent to Macon, Georgia, where I never had been in my life. All this railroaded. I want to get even. But then I realized the world had changed. It had become violent. Now kids were getting hurt. And in 1987, I walked away.
Yeah.
I couldn't take it anymore. Even to a point where I thought I was going to get killed within a month.
Yeah.
So I walked away and I was retired for 4 months. And until they come and got me, because they had a task force following me, because they couldn't stand it that I had retired with all that money.
Yeah.
So basically, at the end, they come up with another case, and which was literally a violation of my parole. And I forfeited everything I had, went back to prison for another 5 years.
Yeah.
So they asked me, why was it so easy for you to walk away and so difficult for guys like Pablo, El Chapo, or one of the subjects of this Cocaine Cowboy, Sal Magluta, when they had tons of passports, tons of money,
and couldn't walk away.
Planes. Listen, in a minute, they could get in a jet and go to a non-extraditing country. Yeah. Robert Vesco, very few people know about Robert Vesco, was the first Ponzi deal in the United States. Yeah. He robbed them a bunch of millions of dollars and went to Cuba. and just died a couple of years ago.
Really?
Lived there all his life with no problem.
Yeah.
Lived like a millionaire that he was.
Yeah.
Why was it so easy for you and difficult for them? And I had never been asked that. And it's interesting because it just came to my mind, just answered it. I said, because I never saw myself as a drug dealer. I saw myself as a businessman. I had numerous companies. I had orange groves, cattle ranches, construction company. I said I had numerous companies, and to me, cocaine was just another product, another company that I had. And when I realized that that product that I was selling now was hurting people, I just quit. And I went with my other companies.
Yeah, yeah.
But for El Chapo, for Pablo, for Sal, all the people, their only identity is a drug dealer.
Yeah.
So for them to leave that behind and go live, in Lululand, retired, a millionaire, quiet for the rest of their life is impossible.
Yeah. It's nearly addictive. It's nearly addictive. What they're doing is nearly addictive because it's not just like they're addicted to the power that they have and I suppose the notoriety and that kind of thing as well, surely.
You just said it. When people ask me, do you miss your life? I'm like, okay, do I miss getting on my jet whenever I felt like going?
Yeah.
Versus flying coach with two people a lot heavier than me and me in the middle? Hell yeah, I miss it.
Yeah.
Do I miss back then when I was young having any woman I wanted? Of course. But I wouldn't change that for the pain that it cost and the emptiness that it brought me.
Yeah.
But the hardest thing for me to give up, the hardest thing was not even making all that money. Because I'll tell you a story. One day, my housekeeper says to me, I had a couch that was angled in the back of my office. And she said, can you move? I was sitting on the couch, looking at some papers. She said, can you move so I can clean behind the couch? I haven't cleaned there in a couple of weeks. And I'm like, sure. I moved it for her. And there was a bag with $700,000 there.
Whew.
I had no idea. This is 1978. I had no idea who dropped it, who it belonged to.
And that's crazy. That's $700,000. That's $700,000 in the 70s when that's in today's worth, that's today. Millions,
At least 4 or 5 million today.
Oh my God.
So it wasn't the money because after you have so much money, but it was the power. The most insidious of all drugs is power.
Yeah.
Ask yourself why some politicians risk all the money, wealth, and comfort they have to become a president.
Yeah.
Or to run for political office. Take our president today.
Yeah.
Why would he want to abandon? His house made the White House look like an outhouse.
Yeah.
That was nicer than Air Force One. He had everything. Why give all that up for half the world to hate you?
Yeah.
Right?
No, I agree.
That power, man. It was
I get
tough for me. Because no one did. In the old days, people didn't think about doing me wrong because they knew I had so much power, I could wipe them out in a second.
Yeah.
Now people do whatever the hell they want to do, and there's nothing I can do.
It's funny because as well, like one of the things you mentioned there was Narcos, the series. And there was two things that obviously you hear all these conspiracy theories, and one of them actually, I was reading something there the other day about the murder of Kiki Camarena, and that was actually, they were saying, now you don't know how true these things are, granted, but they were saying that there was links between the CIA and that Kiki Camarena had found out that the CIA were in bed with the Mexican cartels. And then basically he knew too much. So they were saying that there was CIA involvement in that. And then you've also heard, obviously, they're saying that the CIA or the DEA, whatever, killed Pablo Escobar. But then you hear other theories as well. So you don't really know what to believe. Well,
I know. So literally, I walked away right before the whole deal with Kiki Camarena. Our group was the first group to bring a load of cocaine to Mexico.
Sure.
So Kiki Camarena, that's not true with the CIA. All people see the CIA. Look, how would I say this? The CIA runs a lot of operations that there's no congressional budget for. So where does the money come from? So speculate, right?
Yeah.
I haven't dealt much with the CIA.
Yeah.
The agents and I'm sure there's great people in there. The agents I dealt with were the scut that I knew. were the scum of the earth.
Really?
No education. I mean, horrific.
Yeah.
One of them, Monkey Morales got murdered in Miami.
Yeah.
So as opposed to all the FBI and DEA I dealt with, they were all very educated, very professional.
Yeah.
I mean, as a whole, right? You got someone bad everywhere.
Yeah, of
like
course.
I tell people, look, there's bad people at the grocery store, and I still go there every day.
Sure, yeah.
So that's the thing. With Pablo Escobar, I can tell you this for a fact.
Yeah.
Okay. The version of Narcos is a lie.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
His son said something, and the truth lied a little bit between Narco and what his son said. His son said that Pablo shot himself. Now, I don't know if he did or not, but I do know, because he told me many times, that he was not going to be brought to the United States walking.
Yeah.
I do know that he committed suicide. Now, did he commit suicide by shooting himself, or did he commit suicide by putting himself in a position, which he did, so that they would find him and kill him?
Yeah. Yeah.
So Pablo, as much as a murderer and all that, I hear his son, it breaks my heart, because people ask his son stupid questions, right? Of course, his father was a murderer, horrific person, but I'm sure, without a doubt, that he loved his family tremendously.
Yeah, yeah.
And he loved his children tremendously.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's it. That's human nature.
Yeah.
So when they ask the son, all this stuff, of course he's going to say, hey, my father was a gangster. I know he did all this, but I was too little to know that then. All I know is that he was very loving to us.
Yeah, yeah.
So he knew that when he killed those two brothers, not brothers, but kids that he had grown up with in prison, he knew that it was over with, right?
Yeah.
That they were going to get him. And it wasn't the feds or the DA or no what. I mean, the way Pablo had it and where he was, there was nowhere in the world that would have gotten him, ever. He'd get in a taxi with 10, 15 cell phones, talk for 2.5 minutes. And in that town where he built the schools, and I mean, all the schools that he built and all the houses, he took the initiative, he took the credit, but all of us paid.
Sure,
every one of us was taxed.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I know, anyway. I get you. One thing that you touched on there, was obviously the time when you had the plane crashing in the Panama jungle. Am I right in saying that plane had 200 kilos of cocaine on it?
Yeah, it had 200 kilos of cocaine, and it had ether. Yeah, and it had a bladder, because that's how we would add extra distance to an airplane.
Okay,
a bladder is like a rubber,
to make it a rubber balloon for extra fuel.
Exactly, you fill it up with fuel. That's why we crashed, because both alternators went out, and we couldn't get the fuel from inside the airplane to the wing tank.
Oh my God!
So we ran out of fuel at 5,000 feet.
Yeah.
And I mean, and I should have, like the head of the pilots, the guy I had hired to transport the cocaine. He said, "Hey, blow it up," and I'm like, "No, I'm not going to blow it up. There's $7 million. $12 million in there."
Yeah.
And he's like, "Hey, take the flare gun and blow it up. You'll make that again." But my ego was to a point that I felt indestructible, right? I felt like I was God. Nothing could happen to me. I mean, we were right next to the border of Costa Rica.
Yeah.
We have paid $1 million to get the president of Costa Rica elected. So we knew that we could get it transported to the border very easily.
Okay.
So I thought nothing was going to happen.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it did.
Yeah. And when you were in Panama, it was Noriega, wasn't it, who was in charge of Panama at the time, General Noriega, and you had some rather unpleasant experiences for the you were only there a month and a half, was it?
A month. Actually, Noriega was actually pretty nice to me.
Really?
What happened was, so we crash land, right? If you saw pictures in my book, the plane is dives, so there's no way you can put a ladder. You have to put a ladder to be able to go inside and check it. Yeah. But when they found the drugs, and so what happened is, I gave the commander that came around, I gave him $100. I always kept $20,000 in the hidden compartment. And when he came around, I should have said, "Hey, I got drugs in there. Help me to hide them. and here's $10,000. I mean, he would have hit the airplane by himself, but I didn't. It was stupid of me. And so I said, hey, here's my passports. Can you stamp them to show that we came in here legally? Yeah. And he said, sure. And when he sent my name to Panama City, they're like, stop him. He's the biggest drug dealer in the world today.
Yeah, yeah.
So we come back the next morning because I called Costa Rica. I had someone coming to pick up the drugs. And and we come to next morning. I see the DEA, the Consul General, and I'm like, oh, man, the crap hit the fan. Yeah. But I knew that I could bribe my way out of Latin America.
Yeah.
So when the Attorney General came the next day, he's like, I said, look, don't waste my time, and I'm not going to waste your time. Tell me how much money to buy the coke back and how much money to leave the country.
Yeah.
And he's like, Noriega already sold the coke, but $250,000 for your leave, which is like $1.5 million today. Yeah. So I said, okay, no problem. So I always had a contingency plan, right? So we always had $1 million cash, not $250, $1 million cash in a place with someone with a phone 24 hours a day, that if he was given a certain code with certain numbers, he knew exactly how much money he had to deliver cash the next day where.
Yeah, yeah.
So when he came, I said, fine, here's the code, call this person, and you have the money here in 24 hours.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's like, he does. So the mistake that I made, though, was I should have not said nothing to the pilots.
Yeah.
Because I said to a pilot, hey, they told us they're going to take us to the city of Panama, hang in there. They're going to rough us up a little bit, but we're leaving to Costa Rica.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so we went to the city of Panama, and they took us in a room, and it was empty, no furniture, 4 chairs. And all of a sudden, they bring this little white kid, 45 kilos maybe, small, skinny. They handcuffed to his feet and hand, and they threw him in the floor, and they stuck a broomstick up his anus.
Oh, Jesus.
And blood just splattered all over the place.
Yeah.
And they looked at us, and they said, we caught him with 5 pounds of marijuana.
Fuck.
Now we got 200 kilos of cocaine.
Yeah, yeah.
So the pilots, I mean, they were like huge, man, 1.8 meters something. They're like, they cracked.
They started singing.
So not only did they tell the DEA who was watching, hey, this guy's the biggest drug dealer in the world, but he just bribed your Attorney General.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, now, we're the guy that could get me out. So they threw us in a dungeon and tortured us day and night to the point I bled for 5 years. I mean, they put electricity to my testicles. They would come in 2-3 times a day. I mean, there was blood all over the place, no food, no nothing.
Jesus.
And then when I was about to lose it, and my fear was that I would lose my mind in there. Because I'm looking at this guy across the cells from me, and we're in a dungeon, like a 15th century old prison, 16th century.
Filthy, I'd say, was it?
No light, no nothing, man.
Yeah, yeah.
You're like you see in Men of La Mancha.
Yeah, yeah.
And this guy licking the bars. Been there 3 months.
Jesus.
And I lost it. And I'm like, no, I got to get these people to kill me.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not going to talk. And I don't give a damn. Yeah. So I told when they came that time, before they started beating, I said, look, I want you to know something right now. Tell Noriega, he needs to kill me. Because if he doesn't kill me, he knows I got the power that when I get out, I'm going to find him, find his family. I'm going to have his family raped in front of him, and then I'm going to kill them all.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm like, definitely, that's enough to trigger it. And he came the next day and actually came laughing.
Really?
And he's like, why are you threatening me? You paid the wrong man. I didn't tell on you.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's like, I said, well, how much? He's like, another $250,000. I said, damn, is that the only number these freaking people know? Before I'm paying $250,000 for 4, now I'm paying $250,000 for 2. Give me a break.
Yeah, yeah.
But we did. I paid it, and he did. Next day, he took us to the airport. But instead of sending us to Costa Rica, he had told Interpol.
Yeah. And
while we're waiting for the plane to Costa Rica, Interpol came, grabbed us, and threw us on an airplane to Miami.
Okay, okay. And when you got back to Miami, then Were you arrested when you got back to Miami? Or?
Oh yeah, immediately. They were waiting for us. I mean, it was the biggest drug case in the history of America at that time.
Yeah.
But
you see, it's one thing that I didn't really understand about that was obviously there was no crime committed in America there. So why would you be serving any, like, and if my knowledge is correct, Noriega had taken the cocaine and sold it. So why were you, like, where
they
was
didn't
the
even have
crime?
any coke. They didn't have anything, right?
Yeah.
Except those two parts. Because in the United States, and this is what Pablo Escobar fought. I don't know in Ireland, but I think the United States is the only country in the world that has this law called conspiracy.
Okay.
So in the United States, if you and I talk about, and I said today, hey, brother, let's bring in an airplane with cocaine. And you said, great. And we take one step. All we take, like you say, I have a pilot, let me call him. And you call him.
Yeah.
That's enough for us to be charged. Back then, 15 years. Today, a life sentence.
No way. You can go to jail.
So when they charge me.
So you can go to jail without any crime being committed?
None. So and that's what I fought at, because in my trial, I had the biggest drug lawyers in the world, $1 million worth of defense.
Yeah.
In my trial, my defense was, yes, I am a drug dealer.
Okay.
I said, I'm a drug dealer, but first of all, they tried to indict me. I stayed 6 months on what's called a sworn complaint, no indictment.
Yeah.
And they tried to indict me in the Southern District of Florida, the Middle and Northern. Yeah. And none of them would indict me because there was no crime in Florida.
Wow.
But then in Macon, Georgia, which I've never been in my life, the guy that was with me had a case pending from 6 years ago. I just met him 3 weeks earlier.
Yeah.
And they tied me to him.
Yeah.
So my defense was, listen, my client is a drug dealer. Yeah. But my client's got a constitutional right to what's called venue. If you want to charge my client, you need to charge him in Miami. You can't charge him in Macon. He's never been to Macon in his life.
Yeah.
Because they said that at a little restaurant in Miami, I mean, it was such a joke that they would not, the grand jury would not even indict me. They said, in this little restaurant, the foreign ambassador's cafeteria, which is probably like 2.5 meters by 4 meters, I pulled out this big map of Bolivia, and I said to the pilot, this is where we're going to go pick up these drugs.
Yeah.
Literally. That was enough for them. Again, no wiretap, no pictures, no drugs, nothing. No money, nothing.
It sounds like a very easy way to go down. It sounds like...
So Pablo said, listen, you cannot charge me in the United States for conspiracy because that's not a law in my country.
Yeah, yeah.
So extradition law says I can only be extradited for a crime that's a crime in my country.
Sure, yeah.
And that's what he was fighting.
Gotcha, yeah.
I mean, rightfully so.
Yeah, and you ended up getting sentenced to 15 years, wasn't it?
15 years. But in 1979, if you didn't have a record, if you've never had any felonies, the most you would do is 1/3 of your sentence.
Yeah. So you served 4.5, 5 years?
So I served 5 years, and then I had 10 years parole.
Okay.
So when I got arrested again, that they wanted my money, what I was charged with was violating that parole.
Okay.
Because I came clean. That case, I could have won that case easily because even the only witness that they had the night before killed himself. He was smuggling cocaine in an airplane that belonged to a DEA.
Oh God!
And it was foggy, and he crashed. And but I had turned my life around, and I was tired. Yeah. So when I meet my attorney, I had no clue why am I arrested? I haven't done nothing in 4 years.
Yeah.
And when I meet my attorney, he's like, "Don't worry, you're gonna walk out of here." And I'm really. And he's like, "They got nothing against you. The only it was 165 people indictment. The trial was ended. Everybody that got convicted. The only guy I knew, which was the guy I had hired years ago, that was in prison with me, and when we got out, I hired him to bring in loads for me. He got convicted. He's not testifying. He got life. So one of the pilots said, "This was the indictment." The pilot said that he took my friend to Miami. Yeah. I picked him up at the airport, and then later on at night, my friend came back with a suitcase with $7 million, and went to a pilot and said, look how much money Jorge Valdes gave me.
Yeah.
Now, anyone that's in the business knows that you don't talk to, nobody talks to pilots at that level. That's all BS.
Yeah.
And then that pilot killed himself. So, but for me I was tired of fighting, man.
Yeah.
And I had become a Christian.
Yeah.
And I felt like, when I became a Christian, I didn't believe God was real. I didn't believe God existed.
Yeah.
I had a guy witness to me for 3 years. And I see this guy that's so happy that has nothing.
Yeah.
And here I'm living in this freaking, I had moved to my ranch. I had a $20 million ranch. And I'm living the life of a multimillionaire. And I'm miserable. And this guy's teaching me karate. And he's got nothing. He lives in a little 100 square foot home.
Yeah.
And he's like super happy. Married to the same woman 25 years. He's madly in love with her. I'm going out and going to bed with supermodels and I hate them all.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what the heck, man? This guy got to be on some type of a drug or something.
Yeah.
But for 3 years, man, he walked that talk.
Yeah.
And I never forget, it was July 1st, 1990. My divorce was final.
Yeah.
And my little daughter, which was the apple of my eyes.
Yeah.
My ex-wife is dragging her away and she's crying for me. And I went into my room and I remember that talk. I call it prayer now, but I got on my knees and I said, God, first and foremost, I want to tell you, I don't believe you exist.
Yeah.
I was an atheist.
Yeah.
I said, look, I'm an atheist. Number one, if by some miracle you do exist, I know you're looking at me and say, Joe, you're so bad. I don't want you up here. Stay down there. But if you're real, change me or kill me.
Yeah.
Because if you don't change me, I'm going to spend the rest of my life telling the world what a fake you are.
Yeah.
But I want what that guy has. My money can buy anything. His money cannot buy nothing. And I can buy it. Yeah. I want that peace. I want that joy. I want that content that he has.
Yeah, yeah.
And man, my life went from hell to worse hell. 3 months later, I get picked up and I get arrested.
Oh, no.
And I never done anything wrong. All of a sudden, I'm looking at a life sentence. Yeah. Because even though when I committed the crime, the most they could give me is 15 years.
Yeah. And
in my case, 10 for violation of parole. Because he continued, my partner, Dickie, because he continued, it's called continued criminal enterprise, which means that everybody in that enterprise is charged with the highest crime committed in the enterprise.
Even if you're not involved still?
Nothing.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So, pretty crazy laws. But, so I'm looking at facing 5 life sentences. Number one, a life sentence, conspiracy to import when nothing was imported.
Yeah.
Conspiracy to possess what was going to be imported. Conspiracy to distribute what was going to be possessed, what was going to be imported. That's the United States law.
Yeah.
3 life sentences for the same crime.
Yeah.
So I look at my attorney, and Jewish guy, and he's like, if you plead guilty, they're going to crucify you.
Yeah.
I'm like, Alan, here's the problem. Here you are, a good Jew, telling me I'm going home. And I've decided to follow this other Jew that ain't said nothing to me, man.
Yeah.
And, but I know this thing. If my life is going to change, I got to come clean. I can't go on. Now, I know I could not hurt anyone because statute of limitations run out on everybody.
Yeah.
I said, I got to give them what they want. And basically what they wanted was all my money.
Yeah.
You know, they
weren't going to leave you alone till they got that, right?
And I told him, I said, I've been fighting these people since I'm 20 years old.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I'm done, man.
Yeah.
And he said, but if you do, you have a chance to spend the rest of your life in jail.
Yeah. Yeah.
I said, but if this Jewish carpenter I decided to follow doesn't change my heart, I'm dead anyway. I don't give a shit where I die.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I went back to prison. I got the 10 years, which is the parole. So I served 5. And in prison, I got a master's degree in theology. I wanted to learn about God. And I got a master's degree in theology. When I got out, I got a Ph.D. I became one of 5 Hispanics in the country with a Ph.D. in theology and ethics.
Yeah.
Then my dad died, and I'm missing him a lot. And I realized he never gave me nothing but his time.
Yeah.
So I had 4 children from a prior marriage. living in Georgia, and I was living in Chicago. Yeah. And I'm like, how much are they going to remember me? As someone who sent a check every month and had a good summer. So I left that. I abandoned my teaching career, which was my passion, my love.
Yeah.
And I started a little cleaning company in the basement of our house.
Yeah.
And in 12 years, I built it into a multi-million-dollar national, international company.
Wow.
Then I retired one day, decided to be a dad to my last two little kids, moved the family to Mexico so I can make them breakfast, so I can go to the little league games and just be a dad, you know?
Yeah.
And because I tell people, look, in life, if you cannot define when enough is enough, then the only motivator that's going to drive you is greed.
Yeah.
And if greed is what drives you, you'll never be happy.
Yeah.
So
one of the things that I like, and I always notice this, George, and like, look, you're a prime example of it because, look, you're undoubtedly super intelligent. You're a very, very smart and educated guy, but you often see, and I think this is kind of said a lot, you often see guys like Pablo Escobar, El Chapo Guzman, a lot of these guys, like if these guys had gone into business in something which was legal, these guys would probably have made it, a lot of them, as legitimate businessmen and being multi-millionaires anyway.
Yeah, no doubt. You know, people used to say to me in prison, oh, you made all this money because you're in the drug business. I said, really? I'm in prison with over 1,000 men dead broke, and I'm a millionaire.
Yeah.
So it's not easy money.
No.
It could be fast money, but when you think about every other competitor wants to kill you.
Yeah, it's
every
very
government agency in the world wants to put you behind bar.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to betray you. And you wake up and everybody's following you. And it's easy?
Yeah.
I don't think so, man.
Yeah.
It's nerve-wracking.
Agreed. You've got to be like you're evading people who you don't know who to trust, who are also involved in the game, and then you're looking out for all types of law enforcement in different countries, different jurisdictions, different types of law enforcement. So I mean, you've got to be lucky all the time. You've got to be on your game all the time, it seems. Yeah. So
and you know, it's something very interesting that you said about what Pablo and El Chapo could have been. And it's something that I'm dealing here with in America with the massive incarceration, you know, and the war on drugs. It's the biggest joke in the world.
Agreed.
It's the most corrupt entity in the world. They don't want to rehabilitate anyone. They want a warehouse man so that they can make money off them. And I say this to people. I said, especially let's talk about what's happening with the Black Lives Matter movement and the young kids. Yeah. I said, you got all these kids in prison doing a life sentence that is so unjust because the laws were created in 87. When I walked away, the laws were created to go after people of color in America, especially African Americans. And when you think about it, in 79, I was in prison and whites were 80% of the population. And now, if you combine Latino and blacks, we're almost 92% of the population.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And we're only 4% of the world's population, yet we have 24% of every incarcerated human being in the world.
Yeah.
But I say, you take these young kids that you're locking up, that grew up in a place where they had no chance in life, and you're locking them up for life because let's say that they stole the bike when they were 10, and then they got caught with a joint when they were 14. And all of a sudden now they sold 5 grams or 10 grams of crack, and they're 3 times looser. And you're giving them life at the age of 20, 18, 17. I said, and you're making them into animals. Because number one, you don't want the ones that have a chance to go home, you want to make sure they come back. If you think about in the next 10 years, 8 out of 10 black men in America will go to jail.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Well, funny enough that you're saying that because I was listening, and it has to do with the Black Lives Matter thing where I was listening. Denzel Washington, the actor, was asked about it, and he grew up in somewhere in New York, I believe, and basically 2 of his best friends one of them's in jail for 25 years, one of them went to jail for 15 years, I believe, and he was asked about it, and he said, look, undoubtedly, black people are starting from a disadvantage, and we know that and we accept that, but he said, the big difference between me getting to where I am and my 2 best friends is that I grew up in a home with a father, whereas the other two guys grew up in fatherless homes. Why? And that connects with the point that you just made, George, because you're locking these men up in their 20s, and then they've got kids on the outside, and they grow up in fatherless homes, and then same problem, right?
I just had an interview today, and I said the same thing. I said, look, if you really, why I think the Black Lives Matter movement is dangerous is not that the movement is dangerous. Yeah, there's bad people in every movement, right? And there's a lot of legitimate people, good people that want to see good outcomes out of this. It's dangerous is because they're putting the focus in the wrong thing. And number one, let's be real. If people don't like you, I don't give a damn how much you march, they're not going to like you.
Yeah.
So the old generation in America is not going to like African-American, Latinos, or immigrants, period. That's just the way it is. Yeah. You can't change that. I said, but where we have to start is we have to go back and rebuild those communities, because that child without a father and the mother, if the mother is not a crackhead, she's got to work like crazy to feed her children. Yeah. So who raises that kid? The gangs. Now, I did gang revivals. All right. I don't talk out of theory. I talk about what I know. I did gang revivals in Chicago. And I can tell you this. I'm a person of color in America. Right? Because I'm a Cuban.
Yeah.
I've been racially profiled many times in America as a little kid on, but I've never felt unsafe in a white community in America as I do in a Latino community or African-American community.
Sure.
When I used to do gang revival, my thing was this, and I told both the African-American and the Latino, why the hell are you guys killing each other? Not blacks against Latino. Latinos killing Latinos and blacks killing blacks.
Yeah.
I said, so therefore, if then I go to a guy like Denzel Washington, right?
Yeah.
And so many of them, because no doubt, look, one of the things we need to teach in our schools is the history of the suffering of the black men and women in America, so that this new generation that is still impressionable will grow up with a different outlook and realize, man, these people have been lynched. These people have been at a disadvantage. These people have been discriminated horrifically. They have been sent to the wrong community, on and on and on. Yeah. Okay. But I tell Denzel Washington, and the many black entertainment, because there's a lot of wealth in the African-American community.
Of course.
Who has most of the wealth in the sports industry? African Americans.
Of course, yeah.
Entertainment, rappers.
Yeah.
I would say to Denzel Washington, why the hell the minute you made it, you left?
Yeah.
And you moved to the community of the people that supposed to be oppressing you.
Yeah.
And why didn't you look back? Now, I'm not saying Denzel per se. I don't know what he's done or not, but I know a lot of them don't. Yeah. But I know a guy like LeBron James, who built a school, whether it was his money or friends' money, whoever, but build a school for disenfranchised kids and their parents. And look at that school. That school is outperforming every other school in Ohio.
Yeah.
And if we don't educate those kids, what happens? An uneducated population is a controllable population. I can tell you in prison, 9 out of 10 men that came to prison could not read or write. African American.
Yeah. Like one thing, and you've probably seen it this week as well, which now, admittedly, I've only read snippets of it, so I may be ignorant to some of the facts. But from what I saw, I was kind of a little bit confused. But I saw the former boxer Paulie Malignaggi. He was fired from his job with Showtime for making some comments. Which, I mean, the bits that I was shown, I didn't see anything racist in terms of what he said. And
that's horrific, man. That's another thing that needs to be stopped. Now, I'm a self-made man, okay? Yeah. I live in a gorgeous mansion, and I drive a Rolls Royce. So all with my money, my sacrifice, my hard work. So I don't give a damn what people think of me. Yeah. It doesn't affect me. You know, I'm already retired. But I worry about my kids who are professionals and coming up in a world that they better be like a robot, because if they say something, what the heck, man? Listen, if I don't like a black man and I say it, it's my right. That's why I live in America. Yeah. If I don't like a white man and say it, I should be able to say that.
But I think that one of the things that was kind of, and I was looking at something else today. One of the things that was being pointed out was, like, let's say, for instance, if there's an African-American boxer, and if he makes a racial comment about a white guy, or a rapper makes a racial comment about a white guy, and it's a racist comment, that if he does that, there's like, okay, well, we just ignore that and we move on. But then when it's done, and look, as I'm saying, from what I saw, and I may be wrong, there may have been something, and you've got to be careful in terms of what you say now, but from what I saw, I didn't see anything racist in terms of what Paulie Malignaggi said. So, I mean, trying to silence people over like, for, like, I don't know, as you said, people kind of need to be robots now, you know?
Yeah, look, I believe in freedom of speech, and I believe in respectable. I don't believe that we should have freedom of speech to demean people, to insult people, to call gays faggot or whatever, you know, or to call the N-word to a black person.
Yeah.
I don't believe we should do that, but we should have the ability to be able to say, hey, I don't like the Black Lives Matter movement. And you know what? I believe all lives matter.
Yeah.
Because to me, I understand what they're saying. Okay. Again, by no means do I try to compare my pain to their pain, right?
Yeah.
Cubans were not lynched. Cubans were not thrown in segregated communities, on and on. But we suffer our own form of, racism, whatever it is. Yeah. But racism has been around since the creation of humanity.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
What we need to do as a movement is, number one, I asked this. First of all, you see Colin Kaepernick, when he kneeled respectfully. I didn't see, some African-American athletes defended him, but nobody came to his help.
Yeah.
Now everybody, white people, everybody, it's okay to kneel. Well, if I don't want to kneel, that's my right.
Yeah.
It's also my right if I want to kneel.
Yeah.
I'm not racist because I don't kneel.
No, exactly.
And I'm not racist, and I don't disrespect the flag because I kneel. We left Cuba so we could do this.
Yeah, exactly.
But now we're becoming a robotic. Everybody's offended about everything.
You've got to do this. You've got to do it. Exactly. For me, I think that, look, I think everyone should be respectful of each other. If somebody's using a racist term or something like that, look, I don't think that's acceptable, and I don't think it's acceptable no matter who does it. But I don't think that, I think that if somebody says, I think now we're in a culture, George, where if you say something that somebody doesn't agree with or somebody doesn't like, you mightn't have done something which is racist, or you mightn't have done something which is, it mightn't be wrong, but then, I mean, you can get cancelled, you can get fired for that. And it's like, come on.
Look, it's like when the Me Too movement happened. I have 3 daughters and a wife.
Yeah.
I want them to have respect.
Of course.
I want them to be. But I'll tell you this. You remember when Mike Tyson went to prison for technically raping her? Whether he raped her or not, my question is, what is a Bible school teacher that she's saying doing, going to Mike Tyson's room at 3 o'clock in the morning to teach him about Jesus?
Agreed.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you what happened. As a result of that, every time I had sex with a woman, I had to film it.
Yeah.
To protect myself. And you know how many times filming it saved my ass? 3 times.
Really?
I had 3 different women because all they need to do is go to the hospital or to the police station. If they have your semen, boom, you're dead. It's your word against them. That's wrong.
No, of course it's wrong. Yeah.
We need to respect people. I fight. Listen, I'm not African American, and I fight for African American. I built the only Catholic church in a prison that is predominantly black, Angola, where mine are never going home.
Yeah.
Some of my closest friends are black.
Yeah.
But I'll be damned. If you don't like what I say, don't talk to me.
Yeah.
But you can't crucify me.
Yeah. Unless look. I think we'll move on after this. But I think if people are saying, I suppose, something which is a racist comment, and if you're being provocative, and if you're looking to, like, obviously with people going, look, you can say like the KKK having rallies and whatever. Look, I suppose when they have rallies and that, it is wrong, but I suppose it is within the whole American freedom of speech and whatever. But I suppose even giving them any kind of attention. I think that's stupid as well. And just because they're like, those people are idiots. And if they're going and if they're shouting racism from rooftops and whatever, just ignore them or whatever. But I don't know. Listen, I don't know. It's tough.
Us Cuban, we never felt a victim. Many African American rightfully feel a victim because they have. But at the end of the day, those that have made it need to help. And we need to, number one, fight the prison reform, those criminal justice laws that affect and killing that community. Then we need to fight for the African American community to have better schools for those kids. And then instead of giving them $600 to stay home and do nothing, give them $600 so they can get an education. Why? Because there is a lot of good people in the African American community
100%
that want to get an education but cannot because they have to feed their family.
George, what I think the solution there is, and I think it's the same with the Native American community, is those two communities in particular should get free education, free third level education. So basically that, like, let's say if you're growing up in the Bronx, you're growing up in Harlem or somewhere now, and let's say you're coming from a family with little or no money, and you're there going, well, look, like, why stay in school? I don't have the prospects of going to university or whatever. So those people are starting at a big disadvantage. So give them free third level education.
And give them the money.
Don't do it at the expense of other people who would be in university. Have them in there as well.
Exactly. And the thing is, give them the money so that they can eat. So they don't have to choose between having to work so they can eat and not be able to get an education. Yeah. Provide an education. And those in prison, rehabilitate them. Look what they're doing in LA in a prison where they're teaching them coding.
Yeah.
What are those guys saying in that prison? We'll never go back. Hey, I was in jail when they were rehabilitating people. Nobody that leaves prison wants to go to the prison. Come back. Yeah. I'm going to tell you this. Take me, for example. If I left prison as a twice convicted drug dealer, and nobody would hire me, I couldn't get a job. Society discriminated against me. And I had no way to make a living. You know what I was going to do? I was going to go back to Miami, smuggle drugs. Yeah. That's what I know how to do.
That's the thing. It's a cycle. It's a vicious cycle.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank God I was able to get an education.
Yeah.
I was able to get respect. And I was able to better myself and reinvent myself.
Yeah.
But a lot of these kids don't have that ability. No child, every children born, black, white, red, blue, whatever color, every child born, God looks at them and said, it is good. Yeah. Society makes them bad.
Yeah.
And there's no reason why every child.
Yeah.
They talk about even in the playing field. That's good. But what good is the playing field? What good is to give equal opportunity to every African American if the kids are not prepared to compete?
Yeah. Yeah. No,
they have the intelligence. My God, we had a black president.
Yeah.
That came from a poor family.
Yeah.
We have, some of the most brilliant academic minds. Our history shows us George Washington Carver, a slave, became one of the greatest scientists in America.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've suffered and they're going to continue to suffer, but we must fight to give them a chance from birth.
Exactly.
That's what we got to do.
Agreed. I suppose. Thank you for listening to part one of this two-part podcast with one of the founding members of the Medellin Drugs Cartel, Jorge Valdes.
I hope you have enjoyed part one of the Talk of Shame podcast. Part two gets a little more gritty, so stay tuned. Again, if you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe to it and also share it with all your circle of friends. We're trying to make a difference in the world. I need your help so that we can spread the word. Again, thank you so much for tuning in to the Narco Mindset Podcast. I look forward to seeing you again next week on another episode of the Narco Mindset Podcast.
We've come to the conclusion of this episode of the Narco Mindset Podcast, but your path towards hope, meaning, and redemption continues. For more information and resources to help you on your path towards finding a life built on integrity, honor, and truth, head to JorgeValdesPh.D.com and join our community. We appreciate you joining us for this episode and look forward to helping you find your turning point right here on the Narco Mindset Podcast.